I'm sure it's fine. It's one of those things that you think you are certain are okay, but suddenly you realize that
you need to actually attend to it. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're very delighted you're with us, and I'm just going to begin our seminar now. We're recording. We're live on Facebook. Welcome to our those joining us on Facebook, and greetings to all those joining us in South Africa and internationally for the second seminar in our 10-part series on climate change. I'm Professor David Bilchitz, Director of the South African Institute for Advanced Constitutional, Public, Human Rights and International Law, a center of the University of Johannesburg, and we are delighted to be the hosts of this series. Climate change is perhaps one of the most pressing global problems, and it hangs threateningly over all our heads and the heads of our children and future generations. This series was developed by a group of academics collaborating from across several universities in Johannesburg and across a range of disciplines. The organizers were struck with the need for leadership, to find a way to contribute to the campaign to avert significant harms that are going to be caused by climate change. In brainstorming what could be done, the organizing team recognized the need for greater public understanding around the multiple facets of climate change. The engagement around these issues is also rather limited in South Africa and Africa more generally, even though we are likely to suffer some of the worst climate change effects. As academics, it was decided that we would create a series of seminars with leading experts, which would explore various aspects of climate change from the perspective of multiple disciplines, and hopefully that would help achieve these goals. And so this seminar is grappling with the questions of what climate change is, why it matters, and what must be done to address it. Through carefully designed topics, we delve into science, law, policy, and social justice, and will expose participants to the key debates that occur in these areas. I want to pay tribute at the outset to the multidisciplinary organizing team for their vision and leadership. They are Professor Kitty Dumont from the Department of Psychology at the University of South Africa, Dr. Jenny Hall, the Department of Procedural Law at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Diane Hildebrand, Director of the Institute for the Development of Energy for African Sustainability at the University of South Africa, Professor Lwazi Ngubevana, Director of the African Energy Leadership Center at the Wits Business School, and Professor Colleen Fogel, Distinguished Professor of the Global Change Institute of the University of the Witwatersrand. I also want to thank Constitution Hill for their support and all those who advertise the series, as well as Naomi Ho from SciBac for the administrative side and Ibrahim Karim for the design of our posters. Tonight, we only have 100 places on our Zoom conversation, so we're streaming live on Facebook, and hopefully many more people will join us, and we will also post the video afterwards as well. Our second topic tonight is titled The Discomfort of Uncertainty and the Certain Uncertainty of Scientific Research. And we are excited that it will be delivered by Dr. Pali Lehohla, former Statistician-General of South Africa. I would also like to invite you to our next seminar on topic 3, which is more psychological in orientation. And it will address the question, how do people and societies respond or not to climate change, navigating the complexities of human behavior? That will be delivered by Professor Matthew Hornsey, Professor of Social Psychology at the University of Queensland Business School. And since Professor Hornsey is in Australia, the time will change, just for you to note. So this will be a lunchtime seminar, and it will commence from 12 to 1:15 on the 27th of May, 2021. Okay, so in 3 weeks' time, a lunchtime seminar. Please RSVP to Naomi. I'll post the link in the chat. Okay, Naomi at scifac.org.za for those on Facebook. I will now introduce the chair for tonight's seminar, Professor Lwazi Ngubevana, who will conduct the event and introduce our outstanding guest speaker, Dr. Lehohla. Lwazi is a chemical engineer, energy executive, and academic with extensive global experience in renewable energy investments, advisory, environment, and water desalination industries. He holds a PhD in chemical engineering and an MBA from the University of the Witwatersrand, where he is now the director of the African Energy Center at the Wits Business School. Over to you, Lwazi.
Thank you, David, for that glowing introduction. And welcome to everybody that's joining us from across the world to what I think is going to be a very, very exciting conversation today. I think most of you will have read and heard, through the media and perhaps, through our last session, that, scientists across the globe, there's consensus that climate change is as a result of anthropogenic um, functions, which is we cause it basically through our actions. But you will also have heard that as much as there is global consensus, there's also still various pockets of science that have, that question the science, and they use the very same data to question the issue of climate change. Now, the question is, how do we scientists then communicate and how do we assist governments, politicians, society to make the right decisions when within science itself, there seems to be some uncertainty or at least some dissent when it comes to the numbers. A lot of you will have explored this and thought about it, for example, with the current global challenge that we're facing, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, where at the very beginning there was huge uncertainty in terms of firstly identifying the pandemic itself and classify it as a pandemic, down to how it's transmitted. You remember there was a time when it was thought that wearing of masks wasn't really necessary because the disease was not airborne, but then later on things changed. And this is the reality with science. It evolves. The more we know, the more we improve our communication, and the more certain we can become about the decisions that we take and the advice that we provide to society. Now, to help us try and unpack all of this uncertainty and how we deal with it, and how far science can take us in terms of, being certain that we are making the right calls, and then what level of confidence we can actually provide to decision makers, is somebody who really doesn't need much introduction, I would think. Dr. Pali Lehohla, who's a former Statistician-General of South Africa. He held this position from 2000 up to 2017, and he's certainly the longest serving SG that we've had in the country. Dr. Lehohla served as co-chair of Paris 21 and also the chair of the United Nations Statistics Commission. He was the founding chair of the Statistics Commission of Africa and also chairs the African Symposium for Statistical Development. Dr. Lehohla is vice president of the International Stats Institute and also sponsors the Young African Statistician Movement. In addition to all of this, somehow he finds time to be a columnist. I don't know how he does it. Perhaps he'll share some of his secrets, because he's written, for the last 20 years or so in Business Report. And this is a column that provides a lens, in terms of how society functions. Dr. Lehohla has consulted very extensively, in conflicts and out of conflict states. He's covered areas such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Sudan, Cambodia, and this just to mention a few. In 2015, he was recognized by his alma mater, the University of Ghana, for his contribution to the development of statistics. And in the very same year, he was conferred an honorary doctorate in commerce by the University of Stellenbosch. In 2018, University of KwaZulu-Natal also awarded him an honorary doctorate in science, and University of Zululand honored him with an honorary doctorate in science in 2020. Dr. Lehohla is really well traveled. I really think, this brief that I'm giving is really doing him no justice. But just to sum it up, in 2018, Dr. Lehohla was then appointed by the University of Johannesburg as a professor of practice, and he's also since then become a research associate at Oxford University. He also chairs or is a member of the executive of Indlulamity Scenarios 2030 for South Africa. So this is someone who is very, very important to the country. He's a real treasure to us. And with those words, I would really like to welcome him and plead with him to really share his wisdom with us, help us unpack this very, very complicated scenario that we are facing, and help us hopefully deliver a better message or deliver our message better as scientists. Over to you, Doc.
Thank you very much, Prof. Loazi, and thank you very much for that introduction. Let me try and share my screen. My eye has nothing to do with the introductions that have been made. Instead, it has to do with an environmental issue that I came across in Stellenbosch 2 weeks ago, where I was invited by Professor Madonsela, looking at matters social justice and question of justice and measurement. So I went there and we met at, and that was the third trip I was undertaking this year, having been locked down since March. Previously, every week I would be out in a month, but now it's been 14 months without moving from home. So I found myself in this place in Stellenbosch, and suddenly I developed an allergy. And I wondered what the cause of the allergy was, and the meeting was just about to start. So I had to tell her that, Prof. Madonsela, I have to go to a pharmacist to see what's happening. When I got to the pharmacy, he said, no, there is a lot of stuff here in Stellenbosch, in the valley here. Farmers spray a lot of things, and this is what we are getting. So I am a victim of some of these effects of our own actions on the environment. So my eye has had this, and I thought certainly I would be ready today without having to look like Moshe Dayan, but my certainty has been actually misplaced. So I couldn't predict the situation with any accuracy. Now you know how uncertainty. So I thought that maybe I'll modify the topic to the certainty of uncertainty and the uncertainty of certainty in scientific research. And looking at, well, I'm addressing US climate change leadership, but broadly talking about the question of certainty of uncertainty. And you know, statisticians are very arrogant in the way they work with things. They are so uncertain that they can quantify with certainty, level of certainty, their level of uncertainty. So this is the kind of paradox that we work with. In terms of the outline of the presentation, I think we have to answer the questions, what does climate scientists have to answer? What do they have to answer? What are the drivers, pressures, states, and responses, the DPSR model? Challenges in measurement from a point of view of statistical environmental system of environmental and economic accounts, which I was immersed in as a head of statistics South Africa. And then, of course, prospects for the future. And then I'll make some concluding remarks. I'll touch on challenges of this because I was serving in GO6. And we worked on this, and I was looking at particularly the question of measurement in that global program. So let's start with Chris Barnard. Chris Barnard started with saying to Mrs. Washansky that her husband had a 50-50 chance of surviving. The question was whether in terms of a probability, Chris Barnard's statement was true. Of course, Washansky lived for 13 days after the operation. So in a way, Chris Barnard was correct in saying Mr. Washansky is going to survive. But assigning probability was quite an interesting, heroic measure that Chris Barnard undertook, to say that this man, the first one to be operated upon, had a chance of survival, having not actually operated on anyone before, except on mice. So the question of probability is a very interesting one because it is based on observations that we make over a period of time. And those of observations over a large quantity generates a proportion of those who are positive and those that are negative. And then out of that, you can start saying the probability is based on science and history. But Here was Chris Barnard saying, it's 50-50. And he happens to have been correct. If he had gone to bet a lotto, he would have won. So Chris Barnard, a medical doctor, abused the concept of probability, even though he was correct in saying there was a chance for Washansky to survive. Well, and the medical doctors are very, are guilty of this kind of problem. 1 in 4 will develop cancer. So mammography is important. But when we go into the detail, you'll find that, and the question is whether this is a correct probability statement. Out of 1,000 women tested, 4 will test positive for mammography, and 1 will go on to develop breast cancer. Now, is that 25% will develop breast cancer in 1,000? No. It is out of the 1,000, 4 will test positive, and out of the 4, 1 will go ahead and develop cancer. So the question is, should women go and continue and test for mammography, given that in the public domain, it is said 25% of women will develop breast cancer? The probability there is given that 4 have tested positive and 1 in 4. So it's actually, the denominator there is 1,000. Now, a curious girl with a rare disease overheard the doctor saying that the disease kills 7 in 1,000. Now the girl asked his father, what number am I? So now this reminds me of the halting of J&J, because 6 people in the US out of this 6.6 million that have been vaccinated developed blood clots. Now, the question is, well, if it's 6 in 6 million, the question is, the little girl was asking is quite relevant as to, have we exceeded the quota of COVID clots, so that I can know now I'm past number 6. So this question is a very interesting one, which is about the distribution of events. At what point do they occur? And coming to the conclusion that you are number 6 or you are number 5, given that the first one has, the second one has, what is the probability that you'll also have? That distribution is important. Sally Clark, 1964-2007, was accused and incarcerated for killing 2 of the children from what is called sudden infant death syndrome. They said she must have killed them because Dr. Mayer said, no, the probability of 2 children dying one after the other is 1 in 73 million. And therefore it's impossible, and it must be Mrs. Sally Clark that must have killed the children. Her marriage got destroyed, she got into prison, she lost her mentality, everything, and then finally committed suicide. I mean, these things of numbers and science are matters of life and death. And what did Dr. Madden, he had actually made the mistake. In fact, given that the first child had died, it was very likely that the second child would have died from the same cause. But he did the opposite by multiplying, squaring the denominator 85,000, and squaring it, and then it became 1 in 73 million. In fact, it would have been, the probability would have increased. However, it turned out that actually the second child died of natural causes and not seeds. So now the investigation environment was so wrong and led to all this, and the Royal Society of Statistics in the US, UK, published a report on this matter. Florence Nightingale, very interesting, finds that disproportionate higher number of soldiers die in hospital than in the battlefield. So the best is to avoid the hospital rather than to come to. And then in her inquiries, she found that, okay, there is infection in hospitals because the wounded develop, become septic, and then infections feed, and it's a festive season for infections. And she got antibiotics and managed, she came with that discovery. Otherwise, if you look at that, you would conclude one way or the other that you don't have to go to hospital. In fact, these days we fear to go to hospital with COVID because that's the epicenter of COVID. I mean, something called survivorship bias. The World War, I've argued that many times that those who die don't have anybody who speak for themselves. And politicians like this, including our own here, EP, whenever he opens a factory, Minister Patel, whenever he opens a factory, says, this factory will employ 2,000 people. He doesn't say how many have lost jobs. So survivorship bias is a big problem politically, influences decisions in a very wrong way most of the time. And what happened here was the planes that survived war attacks landed, and when they inspected this, they found that the wings and the tail actually had the bulk of the bullets. Therefore, they went and reinforced the wings and the tail. And Abraham Wald, the statistician, said, no, you are doing the wrong thing. In fact, those are already reinforced and they are not critical to the survival of the plane. Probably the fuselage is where they hit the plane and it collapses. So you've got to reinforce the other parts of the plane that we have not observed, because it is there where we have not observed that wrong things happen. So you see, this brings to us the question of Mulana. Mulana, a friend of his saw him, it was at night, and Mulana was walking up and down. The friend asked him, Mulana, what are you doing? Mulana said, man, I'm looking for my coin. And they said, well, Mulana, yes, you lost your coin. Where did you lose it? Mulana said, I don't know. Then he asked him, why are you there where below the street light? He said, that's where there is light. So the issues that we confront at times when it doesn't, when it is not where it can be seen, then it doesn't exist. These are problems of science, of science that when it is not observable, when it cannot be replicated, when all those things, then it probably doesn't exist. And we know that Thomas Kuhn says science and the development of science is through refutations. So science tells you truths, have truths, and it's through refutations that you do more discoveries. Now, I was once a statistician-general, and in the very first few years of my positioning there, in 2 years, I messed up the consumer price index. And, you know, the cartoonists were not going to spare me, you know. So really trying to build a statistics system is a very, very difficult task. Lots of challenges. And of course, there you can see that I look like Mziwa Wasensizo. And they kept right in front of my eyes. It wasn't this that I have up on my eye, which is the problem with the allergy that I developed, and the style that is on the eye. The cap there, the cartoonist Shapiro was saying, I can't even see the numbers. How could I see? I can't even have my eyes open, and how could I see something on the computer, on a calculator? Of course, they went on to say, well, when I grow up, I'm going to work for Stats SA. These environments are very interesting and very entertaining, as you can see. So what are the drivers, states, pressures, and responses? Looking at the issues of environment, what are the primary drivers of environmental change? What is the current state of the environment? And that's what we're doing with global environmental Geo6. How successful have we been in achieving our internationally agreed environmental goals? Have there been successful environmental policies? What are the policy lessons learned and possible solutions? Is the current policy response enough? What are the business as usual scenarios, and what does a sustainable future look like? And what are the emerging issues and mega trends, including their possible impacts? And what are the possible pathways to achieving Agenda 2030? And there at GEO, we're using this DSPR model, driver states, pressures, and responses to try and assess what is happening in the world. And the US climate scientists have to answer the state of the global environment in relation to what is being agreed in Sustainable Development Goals, provide an effective analysis of the policy response, review the scenarios, assess pathways to 2030, and then, of course, look at what data, knowledge, and all that are available to make our assessments possible. Well, as an illustration of this DSPR model, well, we have, for instance, on the left side, which is the basic data to be directly measured or monitored, or that's that. Performance indicators, out of the indicators, then you generate indices. And what is the criteria of performance assessment? Is it on health, safety, economic development? And what are the objectives, environment, economic, society? This matrix, very important. And these generates the possible relationships. And of course, if you remember, Leontief, input-output tables, very important discovery by the Russian who moved to the US, where his trade became very, very advanced in the construct of the national accounts, the input-output table, and then, of course, which extends to supply and use tables. But this was used largely in the USSR for their horse plan. And by using these relational data sets from inputs to outputs and coming up with that matrix, the Russians could manage their economy, and it surprised everybody in terms of how fast it grew. So these matrices are very important to understand. And of course, what we are trying to do here, which I'm sure you as environmentalists, you know, what are the driving forces, what are the pressures, what are the states, exposure, and of course, effect. And here we look at things like population growth, economic development, technology at one level as driving force, pressures of production and consumption, and waste management, natural resources, which is about the states and natural hazards, pollution, exposure, external exposure, dosage absorbed, target organs for the dose, and well-being, mobility, and mortality. And on the actions that are required is policies, social policy, clean. So policies are very, very, very important. Absolutely very, very important. Education, awareness, treatment. So the world we desire, we create out of policies. So policies actually count. And how you manage the markets and government and our relations are all activities of policy. And therefore, policy design is so crucial to determining the future. There is no automaticity of markets in the environment. It's how much of the policy advocacy done at one level goes to influence those who make decisions. That is at stake. And there's nothing like market forces. It is policies, policy forces. Now, if we were to look at the continent in terms of the system application of systems of environmental and economic accounting, you can see that we have a long way in Africa to go. I mean, there is absolutely nothing except here in South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, and of course, somewhere there in Kenya, and a sprinkling of other countries. So it means that the challenge of actually looking at environmental issues is very, very vast in the case of Africa. So there is a very, and the problem there is that of no data. If you look at the system here, it shows that there is no data to try and measure these important things. And the environment is very naughty. It doesn't stop here at the border of South Africa, Botswana, or Boleswa. It doesn't, Namibia and so on. It doesn't stop there. It just impacts on us whichever way. And then, of course, there are areas where the green is about planning. And of course, in China, which is the biggest polluter, together with the US, you can see the US there, and in China, they are actually working on these matters. And then, of course, the indicators that we are having here are 18 for number of indicators. It's 18, and then, of course, if you go to the Nordic countries and the rest of Europe, you see there is quite a lot of progress there with 69 indicators already. Now, what are the challenges of data for system of environmental? And the challenges are like atmospheric, atmosphere, land. Fortunately, the sensors that we have these days, that we have in the atmosphere can certainly measure, because these things take readings. They look at the particles in the atmosphere, and they can measure. So they can be set up there, and this can be dealt with. The consequences of these atmospheric pollutions are cause of death, sickness, and displacement globally. And in part, the presence of viruses is part and parcel of how we have damaged the environment. For instance, deforestation and chemical pollution. The chemical pollution is why I put this screen on my eye. It's because of the chemical pollution that I suffered in Cape Town last week. And then, of course, well, not that I was looking for land, or nor am I looking for a job, but with my eye the way it is, I'm not likely to get a job. Of course, then the water, the impact on water systems, oceans, and so on. So there are these things that we need good health, but if these impacts are the way they are irreversible damages that we are impacting on in the world. And given that we cannot even measure, so we are like Mulana looking for a coin where there was light. The rest that we cannot measure, probably we say doesn't exist. Now, the impacts of this on challenges of data systems, here are the human development indicators such as ending hunger. The projections do show that perhaps that will change, and preventable deaths under 5, probably that also looks like it will change. I can't see my cursor here, there. And achieve universal access to safe drinking water. The target is over there. The progress is this one. Is still getting there, but it will need to be jacked up. Universal access to modern energy. You can see that we have, but here moving away from improved water quality, it looks like we are moving away from that. Air quality, somewhat not there yet, but we are moving in the wrong direction. Limit global warming, there we can see that we are likely to be moving away from that. And reduce marine nutrient pollution and so on. And so if you go to West Africa and you look at the oceans there on the continent of Africa, you go to Ghana, Nigeria. Of course, when you get to Senegal, the ocean line is better, but when you look at Ghana, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, and so on, the amount of debt and sleaze that is there, it's worrying. And then, of course, achieve land degradation neutrality and whole biodiversity loss. all these show negative signs. These are the challenges that are emerging in front of us. And in addition to the reality, we have not enough data to actually measure, particularly for ourselves in Africa. So what are the active actions and solutions? And it is true that solutions are possible, although they can be undertaken on the basis of knowledge already at hand. There is need for open access to data. I was very pleased that Biden is saying that there must be open access, so suspending intellectual property. I'm a great advocate of free intellectual property, because if you come to think about knowledge creation, surely no one gets born with knowledge. It's something that they acquire, they find it there through generosity of those that have been before them. To come and say, now I have intellectual property on anything, it's really arrogant at best. I mean, what happens to the guinea pigs that are being injected with the vaccine now? Are they part of those who are benefiting from that? No. They are part of those that are getting sacrificed so that we can survive. They are part of the commons. Now, why should a product coming out of that for common good be privatized and then we have an IP? It really just boggles my mind. So I think, as far as we are concerned, a commons such as environment, and indeed life is about commons, and knowledge is about commons. We need to have open source, open data, so that the science can prosper. Keeping these things so that we can pay for the costs is the right thing, to pay for the costs. But to keep so that we can pay for the costs is the wrong strategy. First, therefore, the costs have to be owned commonly, so that those who excel in research can do so without prohibition, so that the discovery that they make then is available to everyone. The vaccine is telling us that. HIV and AIDS told us that when the president of South Africa, Mbeki, stood his ground that no, we need generics. But those who had invested in these ARVs were saying no. Now we know. Even the president of the United States today says, no, let's liberalize vaccines. Indeed, we must liberalize all things knowledge, because it cannot be monopolized. In fact, knowledge is non-rival. The way we are behaving about it by creating monopoly around it is the wrong thing, because knowledge is knowledge when it's shared. It only becomes knowledge when it's shared. Otherwise, it's not knowledge. And you having it and I having it and somebody having it in their own heads doesn't mean the cost. It doesn't have a price to it. It doesn't have this price. It's non-rival, and it can get cheaper and cheaper to acquire the more it becomes open. We need to advance collection of official statistics. One of the things that we had that is very serious in official statistics these days is that they say these data scientists that have come from nowhere with their technologies, all these things, and it created conflict between statisticians, official statisticians like myself, and the data scientists and the people who come with the construct of information technology and so on and so on. And it has brought a lot of conflict, which is not very useful. But part of the conflict is because we want to sell data. Data is non-rival. And the more it is accessed, the better. And because it exists everywhere, there has to be a way in which it is shared and it is governed. Data governance is very, very crucial because it is the new oil. So we said I served on the on the Secretary-General Committee on Data Revolution. There were 25 of us there. And we warned that there will be data wars. And those who own these institutions that produce cell phones and the like, we will soon see tyranny of technology, statistics, and finance. And that will include statisticians, official statisticians included, if these are not regulated. And we need to fill these data gaps, and we have to look at indigenous knowledge systems that exist, in situ knowledge systems. And I think, as we say, that Earth observation is a non-intrusive measurement instrument that should form part of the rubric of measurement. And of course, more open access to data. These are the recommendations that we make from GEO, and this must be for sustainability. And there have been innovations, of course, policy instruments, policy effectiveness, and of course, innovations a lot more in the developing countries as a result of new technologies that are there. And then, of course, as I said, policies are very, very important. And those environmental policies are crucial to look at in a dynamic way, and of course, scaling them over time. And multi-level governance. And there have to be well-established ways of negotiating this. And of course, an integrated approach. I'm not going to go through this, but let me go towards the end of my talk so that there can be discussion. And of course, the advent of information technology, Earth observations, and Earth human systems models, all those things now are possible. You can know traffic flows into urban areas, traffic flows out of urban areas. And the sensor technology really provides on time, as things happen, real-time data disaggregated. Of course, it has its own biases if we think about sampling procedures, but here lie the convergence of Bayesian and frequentists, Fisher and Reverend Bayes come together, because those disciplines have been fighting over a long period of time. The Bayesians, the frequentists fighting the Bayesians, saying that Bayesian estimation is not real statistics. So big data is becoming the main thing, the cheap source, and you capture once and replicate, capture once and reuse. And the traditional knowledge systems are not globally underutilized. They may not have the scientific observation and rigor as we know it ourselves, but that observation over a long period of time actually helps. You can see people going back to using traditional medicine at the moment in the context of coronavirus. Of course, there are these data gaps will be there for the foreseeable future, and Earth observation, as I say, the advance of technology has to be exploited, but care has to be taken. Otherwise, we will see the tyranny of information technology, finance, and statistics. In fact, it has already occurred. Those who have advanced during this COVID are people who are owning technology. Microsoft, all those have made trillions in the middle of a pandemic. There's something fundamentally wrong in the policy space, and now we have created our policies. So how do we position institutions such as statistics, which provide public data? We really need to work hard to have these public institutions strengthened. I had an article recently against the Treasury officials here at home who are saying some of the data collection processes of Stats SA must be outsourced. I don't think they understand the fundamental principles of official statistics. They don't understand the economics of data, that this data is non-rival and you cannot privatize it, you cannot sell it, you can't do anything. It can't be in private hands. It is a commons and therefore it has to be in the public hands for public good. So building Stats SA to where it is today has been a tough effort to get it to where it is from 2003 when I messed up CPI to the time I left. I must say I had a team that worked and worked very hard to get public statistics as a public good for South Africa, including building the system of environmental and economic statistics. So some of the people that are in the private sector and all over wanted to actually create their own series. And, you know, it's terrible when you find that they don't understand the perils of fabrication, where they think they can generate data, they can create fiction around it. And with fake news, things are going to be very, very tough. It's important for official statistics to be at the center of this, particularly to deal with fake news, because official statistics is the pillar from a principle 4, whereby you have to say that statistics is not worthy of being used by a nation. So it is very, very important that these institutions rise to the occasion and they resolve some of the problems. One of the things that we have done, which was not, but we are not able to push. I was leading that when I was Statistician-General, was to petition Ban Ki-moon, the then Secretary-General of the United Nations, against privatization of data, multiplication of institutions that wanted to play in the data space. What one was arguing was, we need a data governance model that will ensure that the data we have is like good medicine that will save nations of the world. So I think I will leave it there, Chair, to say that there are challenges, of course, in official statistics. Got Graciela of Argentina here, Moniro of Canada, who were persecuted by their own governments because they stood by principle 2 of official statistics, applying the best methods possible to generate the right kind of data. So whatever I said, I've spoken about the use of statistics, be it in medical science, be it in wars, be it in interpreting phenomena, that it is a complex science. It needs one to understand what one is talking about. It needs quantification, it needs processing, it needs interaction with society. And when it comes to environmental statistics, there is a lot more work to do, particularly in Africa. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doc. I certainly enjoyed that talk, and I trust that our audience also thoroughly enjoyed it. I do have a couple of questions that have been posted in the chat, and hopefully you'll be able to share some of your wisdom on answering these. Now, the first question is, how do we balance the interests of people living now with the interests of future generations? So, for example, how does government decide on how to balance spending on, say, housing versus spending on new energy technologies that may slow down global warming and improve the world for future generations? So, how do we make these decisions? And is there anything that science can do in actually influencing these policies What do you say to that?
You want me to answer one, or you want me to wait for get more and then?
Let's go one question at a time.
We are not fair to be proper. I was trying to cobble an answer. Okay, no, I'll answer this one. That's fine. Look, my meeting with Professor Madonsela in Cape Town was actually looking at this an issue of social justice. How do you, in sociology and research, is the question of how do we know harm? How do we ensure that we don't do harm? Which is by our current consumption, are we hurting future generations? There is a way in which this can be avoided, because science has developed the level where you can actually estimate and understand consumption patterns currently and ensure that they are sustainable and they save future generations. Science is deployed as a tool to provide that information to those who make policies. But politicians are not keen on that. They want current consumption. I mean, if you think about where we are in South Africa today, you can see that the cats are eating their kittens. So there is no worry about future generations because the kittens will have been eaten. So it's about decimating everything for here and now. There's no tomorrow. So we can deal with the matters of no tomorrow, and we can deal with the matters of a better tomorrow. And one of the things that I'm involved in through Mdulameti scenarios is modeling the future, looking at different policies, their impacts, and how we can get out of the rut of unemployment, inequality. And there is a way of doing so. And that depends on how we craft our policies. And the meeting with Professor Madonsela was about what kind of policies can we evaluate policies before we implement them? Because the science allows you to walk into that virtual space, assess it, and walk back and start implementing. And where there is harm, you can compensate for harm to mitigate that harm. But I can tell you here in South Africa, we don't have that kind of long-term plan. We thought about it and said, what is it, NDP 2030. There are no tools to try and transform that 2030 agenda of South Africa into an implementable program. There's no way you can understand what harm it may cause if we were to do certain things. And that's why we continue to do harm with unemployment at the levels at which it is. It's as though policies are not the instruments that give you leverage to achieve objectives. We must have a policy on employment and a policy on unemployment. At the moment, we don't. If we had it, then unemployment wouldn't be this high. We have a policy on inflation, and inflation is very low. So by bringing policies together, policies are levers for actually framing what you need in the future. Policies have to be agreed upon. I mean, I want to let me stop sharing the screen here and go to another. I'll just get one here because I didn't think, I thought it would be, but I thought it wouldn't. So I'll get a slide that I just want to share here to answer part of the question. Now, where is this stuff now? My apologies. You know, I'm searching with one eye. And by searching with one eye, I have a serious problem. Let me share screen. I'll come to this and share immediately. And I just want to share this. You see, this is how you think about policy space. the policy space must come with things that are politically mobilized, things that make South Africans feel like in 1994, not the things that we have now. There's nothing politically mobilizing in South Africa at the moment. We are actually very depressed by what is happening. We need to think about a socially desirable state and something economically feasible. So policy design must have these three characters. And these three characters must generate a scenario. And scenarios, you don't have one scenario. The NDP was one scenario, which was South Africa that it will be better. You need bad scenarios because you can only understand good in the context of bad and avoid bad. So these paradoxes are necessary in life. These refutations are necessary in life. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that. There is another question. And the question is, this is really about what you spoke about when you talk about creating a culture of common knowledge, common data. So I guess I'd like to get your thoughts on, or your views on public institutions in particular, such as universities.
I'll have to put on a cap because the light is really getting into my eyes.
Okay, no, that's all right. So really, if you just give us your thoughts. I mean, if public institutions like universities were to make their stats public, for example, pass rates, do you think this would be a good start to creating a culture of common knowledge sharing?
Oh, I thought they do. If they don't, I'll tell the Statistician-General to go and force them to do so, because he has to say he wants that data. Indeed, all data ideally has to be official. And by making data official, you need standardization. Because by standardization, you deliver standards to the participants of the system. And they must adhere to that standard. And once they adhere to that standard, then by standardization, you replicate, you capture only once and process and reprocess what you have. And then you are able to store and deliver. It is essentially what needs to be done. Of course, there is a private sector. You don't want to know what price I'm charging for my suits and whatever. These are called business secrets. Those are important and they are available, but there has to be an institution that captures all those business secrets. And then it is empowered to deal with those business secrets by not sharing them. The Statistician-General doesn't share the information of yourself as an individual when he comes for the census next year. I know that this year the census probably has been postponed because of Corona. You give him your data generously, he will not share it with anyone. So is the case in business, so is the case. But the body of data then comes out as aggregates and averages. Of course, for purposes of research, and that's where a person like Florence Nightingale made major progress, or in the medical sciences, where they track an individual with their associated attributes. In that process, they are able to actually disentangle and make more advances. In official statistics, that is a problem because you can't share the data of an individual. You've got to anonymize that individual. And then you can use the data on a basis of an anonymized, in an anonymized fashion. But when everybody is anonymized, you can always reconstruct them and say that one that we are talking about is this one. So there are those kinds of limits, and I hope that official statistics and the laws of ethics will reach a point where the nature of the numbers are available such that we can advance to the same extent as medical science has expanded. And it's because it tracks individual records. That's medical science. And in that way, they make breakthroughs. And it is in those breakthroughs that they make a good progress. Of course, in official statistics, we also provide samples, a sample, and those samples are anonymized. And then we can track them. But if this has to do with individuals, you cannot get that kind of information, because the act of tracking means you have an intimate knowledge of the individual you are working with.
Oh, thank you. Now, just thinking about what you were just saying, especially around the sharing of knowledge, I would like to know, do you think it's our responsibility as scientists to consider the consequences of the information that we share? I'm thinking, you talk climate change. We understand the dire consequences that we are facing now and future generations are facing. But do you think it's we are responsible for ensuring that we share everything that we know, or should there be sort of tempering of what we share so as not to cause instability and chaos in society?
That's a very interesting question. On another time, you will have to invite me to discuss this issue. It intersects on ethics. It has to do with, for instance, in official statistics, I don't care about consequences. I have to measure and give the results as they are. What the consequences are not for me. They are for the politician to manage the consequences. If the GDP number is low and it will attract a recession and it will attract disinvestment, that's not for me. I have measured, I give the results. So you have to measure without fear or favor as a scientist. And you got to deliver the results. For instance, in the area of statistics, I just give them a forward-looking calendar and I'll give the numbers as they are. And politicians are not always very happy with the numbers, but that's what it is. In that respect, scientists too have to actually provide the numbers as they are. I know that you think about, as scientists, you think consequences, because you are a step away from the statistician who gives numbers in aggregates. Doctors give numbers in individual, just to tell the person who have cancer. Now you have to say, well, you have to say that in better ways of saying you have cancer. Of course, the doctors do tell you that you are left with only 40 days to live, so you've got to do something about it. So in a way, there is no much difference between a public officer in statistics, because central to what the statistician does is to provide equity to access and equity to knowledge. Now, if you keep the knowledge to yourself, then you constrain the policy space to respond appropriately to the reality that we have found out. So the scientist too has to do so. And has to say, well, how these people receive the information and how they deal with it, it's a different matter. It's for them to deal with the consequences. Because the more you keep the knowledge to yourself, which is bad, you are also likely to keep good knowledge to yourself.
Yeah, thank you for that very frank response. Now, another question here, and it speaks to how do you balance, science interests and policymakers? Because policymakers, they need, absolute certainty, because the decisions they make, they cost money and they have impact on countries and the globe as a whole. Whereas science works, in experimental ways. We can have the best certainty at that time, but it's only as good as the information that we have at that very moment. So how do you balance these two?
Bohr and Einstein were working with a level of certainty in science that there is something that this fission can actually create an atomic bomb. They ran away from Hitler and they went to the US because they thought that if Hitler knew, things will go awry. Truman, once he got that, he said, I'm going to act with this certainty on Japan. Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombed them to just demonstrate that he's a world power. Now, Sebastian Bohr had to go to the United Nations to say science must be used for good. So there's a moral posture that scientists have. And that moral posture constrains them from exaggerating their certainty. Now you've got a vaccine, and this vaccine, those who manufacture it want to be exonerated from possible effects. Why? Because they have invested a lot of money, and if they get charged, all that money that they have invested will be lost, and they will be paupers. Now, this is where you see the problem of when science is privatized. Because if they go with uncertainty, then they can say we are going with uncertainty. And there's nothing that will privatize. We have everything to socialize. Now they want to privatize profits and socialize risks by saying, well, we have to be exonerated. But when science is not privatized, then the risks and the benefits are socialized. They belong to us all. So it's really very important to liberate science so that we can socialize both risks and benefits. That will also liberate the politicians from abusing science. I mean, the example I made of Truman is an important example because it wasn't the intention of Einstein or Bohr that this will be used for purposes of killing people, but it would have been used for progress. And unfortunately, science has been privatized, and we see limited progress amongst ourselves. And now with the internet and all these things, expansion of technology, privatization of such a public, of a good that has such public implications and impact, ubiquitous public impact, is the wrong thing. It's not a private jet. It's public health. If you want to vaccinate 7 billion people, such an endeavor cannot be in private hands. That is why Biden is correct. That is why Mbeju was correct on the question of HIV and AIDS, be it ARVs or search for vaccine, that it must be in the public space. And it must be publicly funded. I mean, I need to make a point here about Mazzucato. Mariana Mazzucato has weighed in, and so is the economist Lady Koch, that these things must be in the public space. The arguments now are, how can they say so when people have invested so much money? It is exactly that private investment that is remaining very questionable. These are assets that have to be put through public funds. And an entrepreneurial state uses public funds. Putting a man on the moon, as Masugatu says, was a public fund of the United States. If you come back to South Africa, a number of the research institutions, CSIR and all those, were driven by public funds. And the vaccine research was also driven by public funds. It can't be in private hands.
No, agreed. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah. and I suspect that you are preaching to the choir here anyway. I think, you know, us as scientists, we generally have a sort of similar way of thinking when it comes to access, you know, to knowledge and the use of the work that we do for, you know, for the greater good. As you know, everything really should be for the public good. So thank you very much. There is another question. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to have a look at this properly. So the question is, in light of lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, which is an event that's seen unprecedented mobilization by all tiers of government, how are statisticians and thought leaders like yourself repackaging data in order to mobilize governments for other slower moving crises, you know, such as climate change, planetary heating, things like droughts, pollution, etc.? This question is from Roland.
Well, it's a tough question because this pandemic, in part, others reason out that if indeed it comes from a pangolin and a bat, it was those planetary subsystems that have been disrupted that in the end, they left their environment and things started jumping into human beings, provided that the viruses come from those. So lessons emerging from here is that those systems that are slow moving are actually systems that are fast paced, because when they unleash their anger, everybody actually suffers so badly. So there are key lessons around how best can we manage the environment. And 400 men in the world, it's wrong to have 400 men in the world having half the income of the almost 5 billion people that are poor. There's something wrong with that kind of wealth. There's utterly something wrong with the policies that that wealth has generated to guarantee under 500 people to own as much wealth, to own the poverty of the 5 billion. It's really terrible.
Absolutely.
So,
well, Doc, thank you.
It is
much.
that kind of, yeah.
No, thank you very much. I think we have, okay, we're very close to, I think, to the end of our session. But before I close, and when I do close, I'll just, you know, give some reminders of our upcoming topics. But we unfortunately have to share news, you know, for a bit of a somber note. You know, following your very, very exciting presentation. Is Colleen with us here? Colleen, are you on? I can't see you. Dai, do you know if Colleen is on?
Lwazi, I don't see her in the participant list.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Nonetheless,
oh, she is. She is. Okay.
Yes.
I think she hasn't been made a co-host, so she wasn't able to unmute herself.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay. Now
done that. She should be able to unmute herself now.
Okay.
Colleen.
Thank you very much, Colleen.
Right, can you hear me? Hi.
Loud and clear.
Thank you. I was trying to talk, shout through the technology.
You always do.
So thank you very much, and thank you for the very interesting presentation. I've been asked, just as a member of the Global Change Institute at the University of the Witwatersrand, to just share some rather sad news, which some of you may have heard or may not yet have heard. But our colleague, my director, Professor Bob Scholes, who is an A-rated scientist, is a system ecologist, and was a giant of a scientist, both internationally and locally, unfortunately passed away last week whilst on a hike with very close colleagues up in northern Namibia. So the university is organizing a memorial for him next week, and if people would like to find out further details, I can send that to you. But I just wanted to announce that, so there will be more news coming out, I think, in the local press this weekend with obituaries, etc. But yeah, our science is just only as good, I think, sometimes as the scientists who champion it. And unfortunately, we've lost a real giant of a scientist. So sorry to bring such sad news, but that's all I wanted to add. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Colleen. It is, yeah, rather a somber note. Okay, I see Jenny's hand is up.
I just wanted to add to Colleen, and condolences to her and her colleagues, but also to the whole country. As she says, Bob was a giant of a brain. Coincidentally, in line with our topic, Bob and I co-drafted government's first discussion document on climate change. And I am honest enough to admit that Bob held my hand through every piece of that process. But also to note, I think his wife has wanted people to note he was so much more than just that huge brain. He was also the national umpire for rowing.
Yes.
Rest in peace, Bob, and condolences to the colleagues. Truly sad.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, I think Bob did touch most, if not all, our lives on this platform. Yeah, I mean, he was a colleague of mine as well. He did teach, in my master's course in energy leadership, and I think his students as well, will feel his absence. Certainly, as his colleagues, he will certainly be dearly missed. And yes, there is another message from Susan here. Susan George was just expressing, her condolences, to family and friends and colleagues. So thank you very much, Susan.
Well, let me this news reach us on the occasion of my lecture. Convey my deepest condolences that we all share on this platform. In the African culture, probably the Sesotho and the Tswana one, we always say we can't say thank you to news like this. It's very difficult to say thank you for informing us, though, because you don't thank somebody has departed. That's part of the cultural diversity that we have. But certainly, we appreciate that we are informed, and my deepest condolences. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you so much, Doc, for what was a very informative session. And I do think the colleagues and I will have some conversation. Maybe we'll invite you back to have that ethics conversation at a later stage, but we will see how things unfold over time. But before I close off, I just want to remind you again that we have another session coming up on the 27th of May. And this will be the lunchtime session. And what we'll be talking about then is, how do we as people and societies respond or not respond to climate change? So we're going to be trying to navigate, anyway, the complexities really of human behavior. So, what is it that you and I do or can do or don't do to try and make a difference and try and face this challenge? So please do join us. I think you are going to thoroughly enjoy the session. We do have, many other speakers coming up. We still have, is it 7, 8 more sessions coming up, and we are trying to. In fact, I think we can almost safely say that we've secured, some really important and powerful individuals who share their views as we've had today on this issue of climate change, and we are hoping to have, for example, the Minister of Environmental Affairs coming to join us on one of our talks, and the idea there is, we'll be exploring what South Africa wants out of COP21 negotiations later on in the year. So please do keep an eye out on your emails. Everyone that's joined us, you will certainly be getting reminders as we get closer to the dates and invites for you to come and join us. I think that is all from my side. David, is there anything else you maybe want to add?
Thank you very much. No, just to say thank you very much to Dr. Lehohla for a fascinating lecture and for the discussion, and look forward to everyone joining us for topic 3 in 3 weeks' time. Thank you very much.
And of course, not forgetting the organizing committee. Thank you very much. You've all put in a lot of hard work.